hand the funds over to the best off in our society. Let's come back to planet Earth, recognize we're here to fight for an economy that raises up working families, and let's defeat this budget tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent for an additional 2 minutes and thank my friend from Alabama for that.
Without objection.
Okay. I thank my friend from Alabama. Mr. President, let me begin by saying that I get a little bit tired of being lectured about deficit reduction and how significant a problem our deficit is by many folks who voted for legislation time after time after time over the last 10 years that in fact have caused the deficit crisis that we're in right now. Some of us voted against the war in Iraq, which will end up costing $2 to $3 trillion unpaid for. Some of us voted against the Wall Street bailout. Some of us voted against tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. Some of us voted against the Medicare Part D prescription drug program written by the insurance companies. All of those 4 programs have resulted in trillions of dollars in debt. So to those people who voted for that, please don't lecture us about the deficit crisis. We didn't help to cause it. Mr. President, the debate over deficit reduction comes at a very unusual moment in American economic history. While the middle class is in rapid decline, while real median family income is going down, while wages for millions of workers are going down, while poverty is increasing, we also are at a moment when the wealthiest people in this country have never had it so good. Over a recent 25-year period, 80% of all new income went to the top 1%. And today, as a nation with the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country, we have the 400 wealthiest people in America, 400 people owning more wealth than the bottom 125 million. And when you deal with deficit reduction, you have to take into consideration the decline of the middle class, the increase in poverty, and the growing disparity in income and wealth between the people on top and everybody else. Mr. President, given the reality of record-breaking corporate profits and the increasing wealth of the people on top, it should surprise no one that poll after poll shows that the overwhelming majority of Americans want our deficit crisis to be addressed through shared sacrifice, not just coming down heavy on working families and the middle class and the children and the sick and the elderly. The American people, in poll after poll, have said they want everybody to contribute and help to a deficit reduction, not just the most vulnerable people in this society. Unfortunately, the House-passed budget moves us in exactly the wrong direction. It would end Medicare as we know it by giving senior citizens inadequate vouchers to buy health insurance from private companies. Seniors would, on average, see their out-of-pocket expenses double by about $6,000 a year. Seniors at the age of 65 would be given an $8,000 voucher to go to a private insurance company. Now, you tell me, if you are 65, if you are suffering with cancer or another illness, what an $8,000 plan will do for you. It is a disaster. Furthermore, the Republican plan would cut over 10 years $770 billion from Medicaid, vastly increasing the number of uninsured and threatening the long-term care of the elderly who live in nursing homes. The Republican budget would also savage cuts in education, nutrition, affordable housing, infrastructure, environmental protection, and virtually every program that low and moderate-income Americans depend upon. With all of the focus on spending cuts, however, the Republican budget does nothing to reduce unnecessary military spending at a time when our military budget is triple what it was in 1997. What people in Vermont tell me is what people in Oregon are telling the presiding officer, that the time is now to begin accelerating our troops out of Afghanistan. It's the right thing to do public policy-wise. It is certainly the right thing to do for our budget. But, Mr. President, here's the kicker of this whole thing. The House Republican budget does not ask the wealthiest people in this country, whose tax rates are now the lowest on record, to contribute one dime more for deficit reduction. Not one dime more. Yes, we could voucherize Medicare. We could slash Medicaid, education, infrastructure, the environmental protection, but to ask the wealthiest people in this country to pay 1 penny more in taxes after they received hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks, oh my goodness, we can't do that. But, Mr. President, I have another issue I want to raise, and it's not just with the Republicans. It has to do with the Democrats, frankly, and with President Obama. Will the President demand that any deficit reduction agreement ends Bush-era tax breaks for the wealthy? Will he stand up and be tall and fight for that important principle? Will the President fight to eliminate corporate tax loopholes? Will he end the absurd policies which allow the wealthy and large corporations to avoid taxes by establishing phony addresses in offshore tax havens? We are losing about $100 billion a year from the corporations and the wealthy who stash their money in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. My hope is, and I think the American people are hoping, that the President will stand firm in fighting to end those absurd loopholes. As Vermont Senator and a member of the Budget Committee, I will not support a plan to reduce the deficit that does not call for shared sacrifice. At least 50% of any deficit reduction plan must come from increased revenue from the wealthy and large corporations. We must ask the top 2% of income earners who currently pay the lowest upper income tax rate on record to start paying their fair share. Instead of making it harder for working families to send their kids to college, we must end the foreign tax shelters that enable wealthy and large corporations to avoid U.S. taxes. Mr. President, with that, I would yield the floor.
The Majority Leader.
But the Republicans have 2 additional minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm going to use my leader time now, and I ask consent that that time will not take anything away from the debate we have on the budget.
Without objection. Mr.
President, the national security of the United States is at stake, and the junior senator from Kentucky is complaining that he's not been able to offer amendments. Let me take a moment to set the record straight. As all of us and the senator from Kentucky are well aware, they worked long and hard and in good faith to get an agreement to consider amendments. In fact, I offered him a solution that's more than fair. I proposed a consent agreement that would have brought before the Senate 6 amendments, more than half of which, specifically 4, were written by the senator from Kentucky. Unfortunately, in order to continue his political grandstanding, he rejected that offer. It's unfortunate because the inability to reach an agreement has serious consequences. At midnight tomorrow, the Patriot Act will expire. Unless the senator from Kentucky stops standing in the way, our law enforcement will no longer be able to use some of the most critical tools they need to counter terrorists and combat terrorism. If they cannot use these tools, tools that identify and track terrorist suspects, it could have dire consequences for our national security. When the clock strikes midnight tomorrow, we would be giving terrorists the opportunity to plot attacks against our country undetected. In the last several years, the government has stopped dozens of would-be terrorists before they could strike. Now the senator from Kentucky is threatening to take away the best tools we have for stopping them. Does this mean the Patriot Act is perfect? Of course not, Mr. President. But today, the Republican leader and I received a letter from James Clapper, a three-star retired general from the United States military, the nation's director of national intelligence. He knows better than any of us the real effects of letting terrorist fighting tools expire. In his letter, he wrote about our ability to conduct surveillance on foreign radicals, to track purchases of bomb-making materials and other classified programs. All of these would expire with the Patriot Act if we let it expire. This is particularly a bad time to shut down electronic surveillance programs. As has been widely reported in the press, we recovered thousands of documents, photos, videos, and other material from Osama bin Laden's compound. This material has opened dozens of investigations and leads to new terrorist suspects and terrorist activities directed toward the United States of America. It continues to yield more and more information every day. If the senator from Kentucky refuses to relent, the government will be unable to fully pursue these leads. That would increase the risk of a retaliatory terrorist strike against the homeland and hamper our ability to deal a truly fatal blow to al-Qaeda. I repeat, Director Clapper, a retired three-star general, asked us not to allow a moment's interruption in the intelligence community's ability to protect the American people. Some may be asking why. Then, why is the senator from Kentucky holding out? What's keeping him from accepting an agreement to move forward, one that, as I explained, I think is more than fair to him and the Senate? A couple of strong Democratic amendments and his amendments, 4 of them in number. The reason is that he's fighting for an amendment to protect the right not of average citizens but of terrorists to cover up their gun purchases. It's all dealing with a gun amendment, Mr. President. We all remember the tragic Fort Hood shootings less than 2 years ago. A radicalized American terrorist bought guns from a Texas gun store and used them to kill 13 innocent soldiers and civilians. It's hard to imagine why the senator from Kentucky would want to hold up the Patriot Act for a misguided amendment that would make America less safe. The senator from Kentucky also complains that the Senate has not had a week of debate. We all would like to have more debate on this issue. The presiding officer would. We'd like to have a lot of debate on other things, Mr. President. The presiding officer was one of the senators that led an effort earlier in this session to make sure that we'd have more robust debate. We made a little progress, but not enough. But the senator from Kentucky complaining that we haven't had a week of debate better come up with something a little better than that. Here's why. This matter has been before the Senate for 1 week now. I moved to proceed to the Patriot Act last Thursday. Today is Wednesday. As of today, the Senate has been working toward passing this measure for 6 or 7 days. There's no question that the senators have had the opportunity to debate it. The only question has been how senators have chosen to use these last days. The bottom line is that no matter how long it takes to get there, we're going to have this vote, and the vote will win. We will pass the Patriot Act and do everything we can to keep the American people safe. It's up to the senator from Kentucky whether those national security programs will expire before you get a chance to vote. That expiration date is extremely important. And if he thinks that's going to be a badge of courage on his side to have held this up for a few hours, he's made a mistake. It will set this program back significantly, and that's too bad. The clock is ticking. The ball is in his court.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I appreciate the difficulties the majority leader has and would agree with him substantively that the Patriot Act needs to be passed. It does not need to have any gap in it. And as a former federal prosecutor for 15 years, I agree that the Powell Amendment to make our terrorist investigators have to go further and have more difficulty to obtain gun records than the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms investigated for far more minor crimes is a bad policy. I see where he's coming from, and I don't agree with that. I would say that Senator Paul is a courageous, strong, new member of the Senate. He has some deep beliefs. He's entitled to advocate those. I believe he's tried to advocate those in good faith. He thought he had an agreement to be able to offer his amendments, and the majority leader says you can offer amendments, but only the one I approve, and he won't approve the one on guns. And I think that's not healthy in defense of Senator Paul, that he would not have an opportunity to offer the amendment he wants to offer, not the one approved in advance by the majority leader. And I think to the extent that that happens, it diminishes the great, robust tradition of debate in the Senate. So it's a difficult matter, and I know people feel strongly about it, but I wanted to share those thoughts. Mr. President, my good friend, Senator Conrad, who chaired the Budget Committee, made his speech. I was disappointed in some of it. He made one thing, though, that is very dramatic in his statement, and we should think about it. He said that the Ryan budget is insufficient because it allows $8 trillion in new debt to be incurred by the United States over the next 10 years. Think about that. He says that's unthinkable, and really is a dramatic thing that we would have that much debt accrue. But under the budget, the only budget that exists here from the Democratic majority is the President's budget. And the President's budget, as analyzed by the Congressional Budget Office, without any doubt or dispute, they conclude it would add $13 trillion to the debt of the United States in 10 years. They conclude the President's budget, the one that was praised by the Democrats when it came out, would increase the debt, increase spending, and increase taxes more than if we did nothing. I called it the most irresponsible budget ever to be introduced, because it makes our debt situation worse at a time in which we've never faced a more serious systemic debt crisis in America. And Senator Conrad says the federal educational budget, which is basically the federal bureaucracy and some programs that go out, shouldn't have its funding reduced. He didn't acknowledge that the President's budget proposes to increase educational spending to the Washington Department of Education by 10.5% next year, at a time when we are in record deficits. The Department of Energy is proposed to receive a 9.5% increase. The Department of State is proposed to receive a 10.5% increase. The Department of Transportation, with a phantom assumption of revenue from which the administration nowhere says where it will come from, is projected to receive 60% increase to fund all kinds of new high-speed rail and so forth that have not been proven to be effective to date. And we simply, if they are good, we don't have the money. Sometimes you can't do things you'd like to do because you don't have the money. And to that extent, I would say that we're on the wrong track. And let me just say about Congressman Ryan's budget proposal. It does reduce spending every year, significantly. It completely changes the debt trajectory. It reduces spending and deficits every year. It doesn't get to a balance in 10 years, but it eventually gets to a balance in out years, according to their projections. But, of course, intervening Congresses will have much to say about it. But it does change the debt trajectory, and it does put us on the right path. And if passed, in my opinion, would be the kind of budget that would create confidence in the international markets, create jobs and growth in America, and create vitality in our business. And it's something that would be better than doing nothing, and absolutely better than the inexcusable budget that's been presented by the Democrats, the only one they've presented so far. So I wanted to make those points. Mr. President, the simple fact is the American people are unhappy, furious with Washington. And they have every right to be. They work hard, they pay their taxes, they play by the rules. They sacrifice for their families, contribute to their communities, and uphold the nation's values. They have built up the greatest, most dynamic economy on the face of the earth. But Washington continues to waste their tax dollars. They've eroded our values and placed this nation's economy at grave risk. Politicians have arrogantly believed that the rules don't apply to them. In the midst of a deep recession, as American families have tightened their belts, as cities and counties and states have tightened their belts, Washington has gone on a historic spending spree. Did you know during the time of these surging deficits that President Obama's spending, not counting the stimulus, baseline spending for non-defense discretionary spending increased 24% in 2 years? And they say we can't have a reduction in spending back to 2008, or we ought to go back to 2006 levels. The country is not going to cease to exist if we do that. By the end of the first 3 fiscal years of this administration, we will have accumulated another $5 trillion in gross debt. First 3 years. President Bush was criticized, somewhat rightly, for his large budget deficit. It reached $450 billion. The President's budget deficit this year will be $1,600 billion. Every year it's been over $1 trillion. Every year over $1,000 billion. And the average over the next 10 years, according to the budget he submitted, will average over $900 billion, with the lowest single deficit in 10 years because of increased spending, will be $740 billion. The enormous surging debt has prompted the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, to say that our debt represents the greatest threat to our national security. At $14 trillion now, it hovers over our economy like a dark cloud. It undermines confidence. It fosters uncertainty. Studies show our crushing debt stifles job growth and robs us of 1 million jobs a year. Independent economists tell us carrying that debt. We borrow $5 billion a day, $100 billion a month, and under the President's vision, we're on track to do the unthinkable, doubling our entire national debt again in the next 10 years. We are faced with what has rightly been called the most predictable economic crisis in our nation's history. The question is not so much whether a crisis will occur, but whether we act in time to prevent it. A major financial crisis is not just some hypothetical danger. I wish it were. It is very real and it is very serious. If the world loses confidence in our ability to control our spending and debt, our interest rates could dramatically spike. Greece saw its interest rates triple before its debt crisis hit. The rates for Ireland and Portugal went up fourfold. If the same were to happen to the United States, we could become unable to pay the interest on our debt and face a Greek-like debt crisis that plunges this country into another recession. It can happen. This would not be some distant future financial event, as some have supposed, but an economic disaster felt most severely by everyday working Americans, and there's no reason we should be in this situation. There's no reason, no justification whatsoever that a Congress of the United States has allowed this nation to run up what this year is projected to be a $1.5 trillion deficit. It's utterly unacceptable, unexplainable, and cannot be defended. We have to recognize that. We've got to change our business. Americans' workforce is the most productive on earth. Our system of government is the envy of the world. But those who occupy the halls of power have not upheld the public trust. I think I've complained about our spending, but I don't believe I've done enough. Our leaders have squandered this nation's wealth and threatened our children's future. So again, the American people have a right to be furious. They rose up in the last election, and the big spenders in Washington took a shellacking. We saw the emergence of the Tea Party, a diverse collection of Americans spread across the country who, after years of sitting silent, spoke out, many for the first time in their lives. They are good and decent and patriotic Americans who fear for their country and for the future that their children will inherit. And they are right to be concerned. Their concerns are shared by the vast majority of Americans. Overall, more than 70% of the Americans believe this country is on the wrong track. I think primarily because of our spending and our debt. To get back on the right track requires strong leadership, don't we agree? So I've continued to hope that President Obama would rally the country behind needed reform to tell the truth about our crisis. Unfortunately, the President seems determined not only to keep our country on its dangerous course, but to actually accelerate the pace. His budget makes it worse. He offered a budget in February, which he and his budget director declared to the whole world, get this, saying that it would, quote, not add more to the debt. We're trying to tell the American people the country has a serious financial problem, and the President says my budget would not add more to the debt. He went on to say, this was his quote, we'd spend only the money that we have each year, that our budget says we'll only spend the money we have each year, and, quote, we would live within our means. But those statements were just not honest. His budget director tried to defend them, but they're indefensible statements. As I said, the lowest annual deficit in 10 years is $748 billion. How can that be living within our means? The President's budget never once produces a deficit of less than $748 billion. And get this, in the 10th year of his budget, the deficit would be $1.2 trillion, getting worse. And what about the Senate? What is this august body doing to confront the crisis? Is the Budget Committee meeting to work on a plan? I thought we would be meeting. I thought we would have long since met, frankly. Is there a Senate budget being considered on the floor today, a Senate budget produced by a Senate Budget Committee? Or will we be amending a resolution on the Senate floor that the Senate has passed? Well, the answer is no. Today is the 756th day since the Democratically led Senate has passed a budget. In a time that Congress has spent during this 2 years $7 trillion, and we have accumulated another $3.2 trillion in debt. We borrowed $3.2 trillion while we were spending $7 trillion. 40+ cents of every dollar we spend is borrowed. Every expert around the world and at home tells us this cannot continue. And what do we have to show for it all? Unemployment stuck around 9%, very anemic economic growth, and the very real threat of another crisis economically like the bank financial crisis. So that's where we are at, and I think the American people, our ultimate board of directors, the people we serve, are not happy. They think we're on the wrong track. They are correct to so think. It's time for this Congress to get the message and to get the message and change what we're doing. I see my colleague, Senator Paul, here. I know he would like to take 5 minutes to respond to the majority leader. I think he's definitely entitled to that. I would ask consent that he be given 5 minutes, Mr. President, and that 5 minutes not count against the time on this side.
Without objection. The senator from Kentucky.
I rise in response to a scurrilous accusation. I've been accused of wanting to allow terrorists to have weapons to attack America. To be attacked of such a belief when I'm here to discuss and debate the constitutionality of the Patriot Act is offensive. I find it personally insulting. And I think it demeans the body. It demeans the Senate body and the people that we can't have an intelligent debate over the constitutionality of this. I am somehow to be told that because I believe a judge should sign a warrant that I'm in favor of terrorists having weapons. The absurdity of it, the insult of it. If one argues that judges should sign warrants before they go into the house of an alleged murderer, are you in favor of murder? Can we not have a debate on a higher plane? Some constitutional protections, some constitutional procedure, but to come to the floor and accuse me of being in favor of giving weapons to terrorists? The question is can our Constitution withstand? Is our Constitution strong enough that we could actually capture terrorism, capture terrorists, and protect our liberties at the same time? Should we have some rules that say before they come into your house, before they go into your banking records, that a judge should be asked for permission, that should be judicial review? Do we want a lawless land? Do we want a land that is so much without restraint, a government without restraint, that at any point in time they can come into your house? We were very worried about that. That's why our country was founded on principles such as the Fourth Amendment to protect us from an overzealous government. But to transform an argument where good people might disagree into an accusation that I would let terrorists have weapons, no. I believe that we would stop terrorism, but do it in a constitutional fashion where you would have a warrant issued by a judge. Some people say we don't have enough time to do that. At 3 in the morning, judges are routinely called when someone is accused of rape, when someone is accused of murder. When there is an alleged crime, we get warrants, and it works, and it's worked for 225 years until we decided to throw out the Constitution. We threw out the Constitution with the Patriot Act because we changed the Constitution, not by 2/3 in this body voting for it, and not by 3/4 of the state, but by a scared 51% who threw out their liberties. They said, make me safe. I want to be safe. I'm afraid. Make me safe. But they gave up their liberties. I think it was a mistake, and I think we should have an intelligent and rational discussion over this, but I don't think it furthers the debate to accuse someone who has constitutional concerns about the way we are doing things, to accuse them of being in favor of putting weapons into the hands of terrorists. I object strongly to this. The leader has said that they will compromise. They said 1 week of debate in February and open amendments. They would be open to amendments, even amendments they disagreed with. Do whatever people feel is appropriate on this bill. This doesn't mean just amendments that are not emotional or just amendments that have nothing to do with guns. They are petrified to vote on issues of guns because they know that a lot of people in America favor the Second Amendment, own guns, and want to protect it in the right to own guns and the right to have those records not sifted through by the government. We don't want a government that eventually will allow for direction of the police towards those who own guns. We don't want our records to be public. We don't want our records to be sifted through by a government without judicial review. They don't want to vote on this because they know the American people agree with us, and if you polled this question, you'd find 80 to 90% of Americans don't want their banking records, don't want their gun records to be sifted through by a government without a judge ever giving any approval of this. This is a constitutional question, and I would ask the leader to stand by his agreement to an open amendment process. And so at this time, I will ask unanimous consent that my amendments number 363, 365, and 368 be in order, and within 1 hour of debate on each be followed by a roll call vote. And I ask unanimous consent that this occur at this time.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, and of course, as the Senator knows, I've given a statement here on the floor that one amendment, which I understand is in his consent, makes this whole arrangement impossible. I therefore object.
Objection is heard. The senator from Alabama.
I would yield to Senator Ayotte up to 10 minutes, or such time as she may consume.
Madam President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you very much. Today marks the 756th day without a budget, and the Democrat majority has abdicated a basic responsibility that we have in our government, and that is to produce a budget. You know, states produce a budget, cities and towns produce a budget, small businesses don't operate without a budget, and families produce a budget. Yet here we are running over a $1.6 trillion deficit this year alone, and the Democrat-controlled majority, I'm a new member of the Budget Committee, they're not bringing forth a budget or a blueprint for our country to put us on a path of fiscal responsibility. It seems to me if we do nothing else here, that's a basic responsibility we have as members of the Senate. On Monday, all Republican senators joined Senator Sessions and I in sending a letter to the majority leader urging him to take the steps necessary to bring forward a fiscal year 2012 budget in committee, to have a full, honest debate, and then to the floor to make sure that we have a transparent budget debate that the American people can weigh in on so that we can put our country on a fiscally responsible path. As a reminder, the committee should have acted on the budget resolution before the statutory set deadline of April 1st, and Congress should have completed that action by April 15th. Yet, unfortunately, the majority in the Budget Committee and the majority leader has ignored that law. The reality is the majority party controls the workflow in the Budget Committee and determines what is debated here on the floor. And given the enormity of the obvious fiscal challenges that we face, there is no excuse for why my Democrat colleagues have not been able to have a transparent, serious debate both in the Budget Committee and on this floor about our country's fiscal future. The American people demand and are owed nothing less. Unfortunately, instead of coming up with a budget blueprint that puts us on a path to sustainability, many of my Democrat colleagues have primarily focused their efforts on distorting provisions of the House-passed budget plan, trying to score political points while our country's economic future becomes even more precarious. And we've seen the warning signs for our country and other countries around the world and what has happened there, including recently the S&P's negative outlook on our bond rating. Astoundingly, last week the majority leader said it would be foolish for his party to produce a budget plan. In talking directly with my constituents in New Hampshire, I can say with certainty that that's the last word that they would use to describe the Senate's refusal to have their own budget plan and to have a full and robust debate within the Budget Committee and within this body about the fiscal plan for our country's future. That's the last word they would use because they sit around their kitchen tables at home. They put together a budget. They look at the revenue coming in and the expenses they have, and they balance their budgets. And they have no idea why we aren't doing that here. And that should be a fundamental responsibility that, unfortunately, the Majority Leader has described as foolish, even though it's an exercise that families undertake every single day. Last year, Congress failed to pass a budget, failed to pass any of the 12 annual appropriation bills, and failed the nation by recklessly funding the government on a series of short-term spending bills. The Senate cannot make the same mistake that we made last year that was made by the Democrat-controlled Congress this year, given the fiscal path that our country is on. With less than 6 months remaining until the start of the new fiscal year, it's past time for the Senate to produce a basic budget plan that substantively addresses our grave fiscal crisis. We need leadership, and I would call on the Majority Leader to show that leadership and the Chairman of the Budget Committee to bring forth a budget in our Senate committee. And I'm a brand new member of the Budget Committee. I look forward to having that debate in that very important committee in our body, to work together with members on both sides of the aisle to craft a responsible budget plan that reduces spending and brings us to a balanced budget. That's what our country needs. In the letter that was sent to the Majority Leader, Republicans made clear that we're ready to make the difficult choices to preserve our country and to get our fiscal house in order once and all. We stand ready to preserve the greatest country in the world. There's no question that the budget process is broken when we don't even have a budget brought forth before the Budget Committee and a full and robust debate in this body. Congress must get serious about putting in place spending reforms. I'd like to see a balanced budget amendment to our Constitution to make sure that Congress can't get around any spending reforms that we pass. You know, states balance their budget, and yet here in Washington we just continue to spend money that we do not have, unfortunately. Now, Congressman Ryan and the House has proposed and the House has passed a budget blueprint for our country. Yet my friends on the other side of the aisle have spent considerable time demagoguing the House budget blueprint and their plan, even though they've shown the courage to put forth a budget that puts us on a path to reduce spending and eventually brings us to a balanced budget. They brought out the usual scare tactics, but for all their grandstanding, they haven't been straight with the American people. We do need to address entitlement reform. We do need to make changes to Medicare to preserve Medicare for those who are relying on Medicare right now and for future generations. I'm the mother of 2 children, and I certainly don't want to look my children in the eye with the fiscal crisis that our country is facing and have them say to me, "Mom, what did you do about this?" Now is the time to act. We have 3 choices when it comes to addressing rising health care costs in Medicare. We can do nothing and watch the program go bankrupt in 2024, as outlined by the recent trustees report of Medicare, an objective report that basically says that program will go bankrupt by 2024. We can go forward with the President's proposal to ration care through the administration's plan to have an unelected board of 15 bureaucrats who are going to decide who's going to get coverage, when they're going to get coverage, and how physicians are going to get paid. Or we can show real leadership and strengthen the program to make it solvent for current beneficiaries and also for future beneficiaries of our country, and allow them to make the choices instead of an unelected group of 15 individuals that's accountable not to Congress and certainly not to the people whose lives will be affected. I commend Congressman Ryan for his courageousness And I challenge anyone, including the members on the other side of the aisle who have been so critical of the plan, where is your plan? What is your constructive plan to save Medicare? How do you go home to your constituents, your elderly constituents, people like my grandparents who are relying on Medicare, knowing that the trustees' report says that it's going bankrupt in 2024, and say to them, I don't have a plan? A constructive plan to preserve this program is important. It's what Republicans are committed to. We are here to save Medicare, to save our entitlement programs, and most of all, to save our country from financial ruin. Now is the time for leadership. It's time to look at the challenges we face with eyes wide open and to have the courage to fight for the American people and for the future of the greatest country in the world. We cannot afford to kick this can down the road.
The senator has used 10 minutes.
Thank you. If I may finish up. Thank you, Senator Sessions.
Certainly.
We cannot afford to kick this can down the road any further. We must act now. We must address our entitlement programs now. And I would call on the majority leader, I would call on Senate Democrats, rather than demagoguing the plan that has come forward from the House, if you have a constructive plan of your own, please come to the floor right now and bring it forth that will preserve Medicare, will preserve our entitlement programs, and put us on a path to fiscal responsibility and sustainability, to a balanced budget to save our country. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator DeParts, I want to thank her for
Senator from Alabama.
our good comments and very valuable and constructive insights. I would just ask her about one thing. I know a lot of our new members came to Congress having campaigned and talked to people all over their states with a passion to do something about the unsustainable spending path we're on. And we had a large number who wanted to be on the Budget Committee, and we're glad that you just got on. But let me ask you, is it a disappointment to get on the Budget Committee that the law says should write a budget and have hearings on the budget, and then to find that the majority leader has decided not to even allow a budget hearing to take place?
Well, I thank my friend from Alabama for that question. But as the newest member of the Budget Committee, is an extreme disappointment, because I was looking forward to rolling up my sleeves and undertaking the responsibilities of putting forth a responsible budget to preserve our country. That's why I wanted to serve on the Budget Committee. I come from a small business family. I know you can't operate a business without a budget. So many of my constituents and those I met on the campaign trail, they ask me all the time, I have no idea, how can we operate a government without a budget? And yet here we are, and that's what's been so disappointing to me. And I hope and I would urge our Democrat colleagues to change course on this and let the Budget Committee do what it is supposed to do.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Senator Ayotte, New Hampshire. She's following in the footsteps of a great budget leader, chairman and ranking member, Judge Gregg, and brings those good instincts to the body. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that following the remark that Republican speakers be limited to 10 minutes each, and I would at this point be pleased to recognize my very able and effective colleague, Senator DeMint, for his comments at this time.
Thank you, Senator Sessions.
Without objection. The senator from South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Senator Sessions, thank you for leading these few minutes of debate that we were allowed. It's really an extraordinary situation where we are as a nation, that we're here with only a few minutes of debate about what has become the most serious situation our country has ever faced, and that's our debt. When President Obama was a senator in 2006, he said increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Admiral Mullins, our Joint Chiefs of Staff, our Chief of Staff has said that our biggest national security threat is our debt. We know that the rating agencies that look at our financial condition, like Standard & Poor's, have downgraded us. We know that major capital funds have divested of Treasury notes, concerned about our political will to deal with our debt. Yet we don't have a budget. We don't have any plan to deal with the debt. And everything Republicans put forward in the House and the Senate, the Democrats sit on the sidelines and criticize, misrepresent, and yet offer no solutions themselves. It's hard to deal with $14 trillion in debt and what it really means. Here's one chart that's somewhat helpful. We know that Greece and Ireland and Portugal, we're hearing in the news that they're bankrupt, they're close to defaulting, they're having to be bailed out by the International Monetary Fund. These charts just show the percent of debt relative to their total economy, their GDP. We see Greece is already at 136. Ireland is at 75%. Portugal, 82%. And if you add all the liabilities that we have as a nation, we're already at 95%, which means we have more debt relative to our total economy than Portugal and Ireland already. And very soon we're on a track to even outpace Greece. Yet we don't even have a budget here, no plan of what to spend. When Republicans talk about the need to cut spending, all we get is criticism. The President has actually submitted a budget that nearly doubles our debt over the next 10 years. We'll get a chance to vote on it. Not even the Democrats are going to vote for that budget. But they have not presented one on their own. We'll also get a chance to vote on the House budget. The Democrats think if we do, that's going to hurt us. But I think you'll see most Republicans vote for it because they know we have to deal with Medicare. The President's budget cuts what Medicare pays doctors another 35%. Already, about 50% of the doctors in this country will not see new Medicare patients. The President cut $500 billion from Medicare to help pay for Obamacare, and somehow can look us in the eye and say this strengthened Medicare. The fact is the Democrats have Medicare on a course of bankruptcy, which is going to happen much sooner than is projected because people won't be able to find a doctor if the President's budget is implemented anywhere close to where it's going to be implemented. Republicans are trying to save Medicare and make sure there are options for seniors in the future that will be good options for them, that they'll have a way to pay for health care in the future. Medicare will not be there. Anyone who looks at seniors today and tells seniors that traditional Medicare is going to be there 5 or 10 years from now is not telling the truth, because it's not. Doctors will not see Medicare patients at the rate we're going to pay. All we're doing today is we've got some what we call message votes, show votes. They're set up to fail. The Majority Leader does not intend to pass any budget, not the President's budget, not a Republican budget. They won't even offer one on their own. So we're going to leave here today with this situation right here, with America approaching a debt level which we've seen take down other countries and continue to ignore the obvious. And as has already been referenced by Senator Ayotte, the Majority Leader actually said there's no need to have a Democrat budget. It would be foolish of us to do a budget at this stage. It would be foolish because it would reveal what they really intend to do, which is to keep spending and keep borrowing, keep investing, keep growing government programs, and not making those hard decisions that have to be made to pull our country away from the edge of a cliff, which is where we are. Everyone outside of Washington seems to understand that we've got an urgent situation right now. Yet here we are today with just these show votes of a budget with no intent of dealing with this at all, when what we need to be doing is recognizing the President, who has said our debt is our biggest problem and that it's a failure of leadership to ask for an increase in the debt ceiling, is we need to recognize that we cannot raise this debt ceiling. We cannot increase our debt unless we make the hard decisions that need to be made for the future. And the only decision that will really change this place
is if we pass a balanced budget requirement for the Congress that the states have to ratify. If we pass that this year before we voted on the debt ceiling, then the people of this country and all 50 states would have a chance to ratify that. It would take a year, 2, 3 years to be ratified, and then there's another 5 years implementation built into the bill. So we're talking 6 or 8 years to get to a balanced budget. If we cannot make that commitment as a Congress, we are in effect committing to bankrupt our country. Because all of us know we can't keep spending more than we're bringing in when they're already telling us we're at a debt level that's going to bankrupt our country, that we can't even pay the interest if interest rates go up at all. We have got to be responsible, and what we're doing today is completely irresponsible. I can't raise the rhetorical level high enough to talk about the absurdity of where we are here. We put our country in danger, our future at risk, yet we're having show votes on budgets and no budget at all from the Democrat majority. So, Madam President, I appreciate the Senator from Alabama at least taking this time that we have to point out the real issues here and the urgency of the matter and the fact that we need to move from show to real substance. We can't roll up our sleeves and work together if the other side does not agree we have a problem. And we do have a problem, and the only way to change that is for us to agree here as a Congress to balance our budget within a reasonable window and to put that structure on us so that we keep that budget balance in the future. Thank you, Senator Sessions, and I will yield back.
The Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And the Senator from Alabama, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on this really extremely important issue. Let me follow up on the central point that Senator DeMint from South Carolina has been making. Because when I go back to Pennsylvania and I talk to my constituents about the fact that the government of the United States, the world's biggest enterprise, an enterprise that's going to spend $3.6 trillion this year, and we're doing it without a budget, they look at me in shocked disbelief that this could even be possible. But it's possible because my colleagues here in the Senate, my Democratic colleagues, refuse to produce a budget. It's just an unbelievable abdication of responsibility. But my colleagues have asked the American people to elect them to the United States Senate, to ask the American people to be the majority party of the United States Senate, which they are, and their attitude is they have no responsibility to lay out a plan for how they want to spend the $3.6 trillion that they want to spend. They have no intention of laying out the plan of where the revenue is going to come from, how much it's going to come from, in which areas, and how should this money be spent. No overall blueprint, no guidelines, no architecture for spending this staggering sum of money. This is an extraordinary abandonment of a very fundamental responsibility. And I have to say I have a hard time listening to the criticism of the House budget by people who have offered no budget as an alternative. And let me speak about the House budget for just a minute, because it's taken a great deal of criticism from my friends on the other side, in particular because 10 years hence, in this budget, they recommend reforms to Medicare that save Medicare. And I want to stress this point. The current policies being advocated, not in a budget, but being advocated elsewhere by my Democratic friends, they are currently in the process of crushing Medicare, because that's what's happening. Talk to your doctors back home. Talk to your hospitals. We have small hospitals across Pennsylvania that are increasingly finding it so difficult to operate. Reimbursements are being gradually crushed down. We have this threat that doctors' reimbursements are going to be dramatically cut. And we've created, in the President's health care overhaul, we've created this independent payment advisory board, as it's called, the purpose of which is to find ways to ratchet down reimbursements for health care providers. You know, one of the things that breaks my heart is how often I have had the conversation with a doctor who tells me, often choking up in the process, that he's encouraging his kids to pursue some other line of work, some other profession, other than health care, the profession that he or she has dedicated their life to. But this is the state of affairs that we have today because of where Medicare is and where it's heading. So the House comes along and offers a plan that saves Medicare, puts it on a viable, sustainable footing for future generations, and they get attacked for it. You know, is it the perfect plan? Is it the only plan? I'm sure it's not, but it would work. And you know, one of the things that makes so much sense about what they're doing is they're altering the payments as a function of people's wealth and health. Makes a lot of sense. So when younger people reach retirement age, they get more financial help from the government if their income is lower and their health is worse, and they'd get less if they're wealthy and relatively healthy. And this mechanism would put individuals in control of their own health care and put the government on a sustainable path. Frankly, I think we ought to congratulate them for doing some very thoughtful work, and I'm going to vote for the House plan. Now, what the House plan does is it addresses a very long-term structural problem that we have for our budget and does it in a very thoughtful and sensible way. But I'm introducing an alternative budget because I want to focus on the nearer term. My focus is just these next 10 years because I think we've got a crisis staring us right in the face and we've got to deal with it now. And so I think we've got to deal with it in next year's spending and in the immediate future. And a big part of my goal and what we've demonstrated in the budget that I've introduced and that we'll have a vote on in a little while is that we can balance this budget within 10 years. And I think that's just a very important goal. My budget accomplishes that really with two elements. Policies that generate strong economic growth, which have all kinds of benefits, not the least of which is it generates more revenue for the federal government. And the other part of this is we've got to tighten our belt. This government's been spending way too much money. My budget ratchets that back, and the combination brings us to balance within 9 years and generates a modest surplus within 10 years. In the process, we dramatically reduce the amount of debt as a percentage of GDP. We just saw the senator from South Carolina present a comparison of what a dangerous position we are already in compared to that of other countries who have racked up too much debt as a percentage of their economies. Well, we are following on this very dangerous path. What my budget does is starts to reverse that curve, starts to lower the debt as a percentage of GDP, and by bringing the budget into balance, it will actually stop growing the debt altogether, which I think is a very important goal. Part of that is through pro-growth tax policies. So, number one, we would, in this budget, we would ask the relevant committees in the two bodies to enact reforms that would simplify the tax code dramatically and allow us to lower marginal rates. Combination of a simplified code and lower marginal rates is absolutely guaranteed to generate economic growth. I would do it on the corporate side as well as on the individual side. And on the corporate side, move to a territorial-based tax system so that we wouldn't continue to have the tremendous competitive disadvantage that we have vis-a-vis our trading partners. On health care, we take a different approach on Medicare. We're just focused on these next 10 years. Over the next 10 years, what we do is really two things. One is we end the fiction that we're going to cut doctors by 30% or end the threat, depending on how you choose to look at it. So the sustainable growth rate, as it's called around here, this notion that we have to massively cut reimbursements to doctors all of a sudden, that's done away with. And we recognize that that would be very imprudent policy. Another thing that we do is we adopt one of the recommendations from the Simpson-Bowles Commission on medical malpractice liability reform. That helps to save some significant money across the board in health care. Certainly that includes Medicare. On Medicaid, we adopt a very similar approach to that which is done in the House budget, which is to say this is completely unsustainable in its current form. Medicaid's been doubling every 8 years, and it's a big driver of the deficit that we have in Washington. It's also a big driver of huge deficits across the 50 states. It's a big problem because the states have little or no flexibility in how they administer this program. They've got a big financial burden that comes with it. And what I think we ought to do is take these resources, block grant them to the states, and give the states the flexibility to figure out a better way to deliver health care services to low-income people. And I think that among our 50 states, I'm very confident that there will be many who will come up with better models, and as they do, they will be adopted generally, and we can put this program on a sustainable path, which it is certainly not on today. On some other areas of spending, on non-defense discretionary spending, look, we've got to cut this. We've grown it too much. And in recent years, in fact, the big surge in the deficit in recent years has come from the discretionary side. So what we call for is lowering non-defense discretionary spending to the level it was at in 2006, and then freezing that for 6 years, after which it would be indexed to the Consumer Price Index. Other mandatory spending, aside from the big entitlement programs, would gradually be reduced to just over their 2007 level. I say gradually. We do this so that people have a chance to adjust. I think, frankly, the economic growth that we would get from the lower taxes, the lower marginal tax rates, I should say, would help facilitate this. It gets lowered to 2007 levels by 2014, after which it grows at CPI. Our budget calls for no changes whatsoever to Social Security, and it calls for none of the structural changes to Medicare, because those would occur after the 10-year window, and we're focused on just these next 10 years. Madam President, I would strongly stress that we are staring at a full-blown crisis. We don't know whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now or 18 months or even nearer. That is impossible to know. But it's impossible to deny that we cannot continue on this course. We cannot continue running multi-trillion-dollar deficits that are 10% of our entire economic output, that rack up this huge amount of debt that we have done in recent years. That is not sustainable. You know, my first career out of college was in finance. And when I was working in finance, the idea of the federal government of the United States of America even having a credit rating was not something that was understood to be that way. We see, the United States of America was above the credit rating system. It didn't apply to us. A AAA rating wasn't even really relevant, because you didn't even talk about the creditworthiness of the United States, except to refer to it as the risk-free interest rate, the risk-free security, the security for which there was no risk of a failure, because this was, after all, the government of the United States of America. Well, now we're in a position that is absolutely shocking to me. We very much are subject to a credit rating, but it's worse than that. We have S&P telling us that they are actively contemplating the day on which they will lower our credit rating. We won't even be a AAA. This is absolutely shocking to me, and it has tremendously dire consequences. I will close by just saying we cannot kick this can down the road anymore. We need to do something now. I've got a budget that balances within 10 years, and I would urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.